we're going to look at reinvestment of understanding, competency 2. But more specifically, we're going to ask and answer the question, what is a reinvestment task? Competency 2 is we ask you to do two things: to evaluate evidence of understanding and to get students to use their understanding of the texts in a reinvestment task. Well, evidence of understanding is pretty straightforward. Do the kids understand what they've watched, read, or listened to? Reinvestment tasks, however, are a little trickier. So in order to explain this, let's first take a look at what it says in the PFEQ. All right, so this is taken directly from the ESL core program description of competency 2. And you can see here we've got reinvests understanding, right? That's competency 2, key features. And under the key features, it says carries out a reinvestment task. Right, that's an integral part of it. What does it mean to carry out an reinvestment task? Well, we ask students to select, organize, and adapt knowledge from texts. Okay, that's also included here, end of cycle outcomes. We use knowledge from the texts in a reinvestment task. So again, students reinvest knowledge from texts, so ideas and information from texts. They select, organize, and adapt these ideas in a reinvestment task. The tasks are relevant and show clear links to the original texts. All right, so I don't know about you, but I'm not too much further ahead. In fact, I'm a little bit more confused as I read this, especially when it comes to internal and external features. You'll see that internal and external features are written all over the place in the ministry information. So we see it here, internal and external features, all over the place. Expands knowledge of internal and external features. What are these internal and external features? Well, again, let's have a look at this. Text features. So this is a page from the same program, and it's on texts, right? The term text refers to any form of communication. So that can be text that we read, text that we watch, text that we listen to. I'm going to use the word read throughout in order to just sort of explain how you engage with the text, but that can be watching and listening as well. So text features, as we see here, to help students read and write and produce text, we look at the internal and external features. So the internal features are things like when you're looking at a newspaper, the headline, the photo, the lead story, or the editorial. They take into account the topic and information and language and text components. So that means that when we're looking at something like a cartoon, the thing that we see right in front of us, what makes a cartoon different from a movie? What makes an email different from a poster? What makes a song different from a letter? You should be able to tell this right away. It's something that we instinctually do. But we can tell by looking at a text the kind of language that's there, the kind of font that's used, the size of it, whether there are images. Even this text that we're looking at right now, is there an infographic here? Like we have a graphic image here talking about popular text, literary text, and information-based text. We have a title here, we have a pull quote. This in itself is a text that we can pull apart. So internal features are things that we see in front of us, the topic, information, and language, and things like images, color, font. The external features are just the things outside of the text, the larger ideas. So what's the point of this text? What's the purpose? Is it to express an opinion? To inform someone? Who's meant to be reading it? For this text that we're looking at, we've talked about the features. We have a graphic here. We have a pull quote here, we have columns, we have a title. So that's the features of the text. There's certain kind of language here that's informative. The purpose of this text, well, it's from the ministry. It's intended to inform you of parts of the program. The audience, well, it's teachers, right? ESL teachers and people who are interested in. The culture, it reflects the kind of culture that we live, work, and teach in. So the kind of goals and aspirations that we have for our students. And if you're not quite sure, there's another great page here. talks about it again. So this is again from the Programme de Formation d'Éducation du Québec, the PFEQ. And we have our internal features here, topic. So what is it talking about? What is some of the information from the text? What kind of language is the text using? For example, in poetry, there's a whole different kind of language. What are the text components? So if it's a movie or a commercial, a visual commercial, you might see camera angles, credits. If it's a comic book, you might see frames and speech bubbles. You really need to dig into that. If it's a poem, meter, rhyme, couplets. Okay, so that's the internal features, what we see in front of us. The external features, again, what is its purpose? Is it to inform? Is it to entertain? Is it to express an opinion? Is it to convince you of something? Who's reading it? Teachers, parents, kids, peers, little kids? What culture is it coming from? Is it coming from one that's familiar to you? Is it a youth culture? Is it a subculture? Is it a culture from another country? All right, so this is all perhaps a little bit vague, but we know that we're using internal and external features. So anytime you engage with a text and you want the kids to do a reinvestment task, we're going to take these kind of things here and get the kids to do something with it. So let's have a look at an example. In a book that I helped to write, we did a unit on superheroes and supervillains. And one of the things the students had to do was read these kind of player cards about different villains. So this is Cheetah, Dr. Octopus, and the Joker. All right, so let's have a look here. We'll break it down with the internal features and external features. So for example, looking a little bit more closely, what are some of the internal features? Well, first of all, the topic. The topic is supervillains and superheroes. Okay, so this is something we can keep in mind. When we're doing a reinvestment task, we can use the topic. So we can do a reinvestment task asking students to reinvest what they know about supervillains and superheroes. What kind of language is being used here? Well, if we read through the different cards, I notice right away, and you're going to see this, there's a lot of description. And description involves adjectives. And here specifically, it's not just any adjectives, but kind of superlative, comparative and superlative. Also in the biography, we're using a lot of past tense. Simple past tense. Why? Because we are doing a biography, right? A narrative, a brief narrative. So things happened in the past. They were born, they became, they drank a potion, something went wrong. So the language here is simple, but it's descriptions, comparative and superlative adjectives, and simple narratives. So simple past tense. Getting down to the text components. All right, this is not just a paragraph on a Word document in black and white, right? We've got different things here that have turned the information into something a little more. For example, this is an icon, right? A little image representing the supervillain in this case. We also see that each of the cards has a title for the supervillain's name. And we have some key features on each of the cards. So their real name, their alias, their allies, their archenemy, and their biography. Right? Each one of those has that. So some of the text components we would maybe ask the students to reinvest if they were to write their own card would be the icon, the title, and some keywords. Okay. So if those are the internal features, right, that's what we see in front of our eyes, what are the external features? Well, first of all, what's the purpose? What's the purpose of cards like this? Is it to explain to teachers the réforme for ESL in Quebec? No. The purpose is something like to inform or entertain people. Inform people about the background of supervillains if you're interested in that, but really for entertainment, right? Who reads these things? Arguably anyone can read these things, but they're probably targeted towards teens and young adults. And honestly, in this case, it was in an ESL textbook, so it would be written for ESL students. What kind of culture is it embedded in? Well, it's mostly a Western culture, right? We have a long tradition of superheroes and villains and comic books and comic book characters. And it's also a kind of subculture, right? So we can say subculture of comic books and superheroes and that whole genre there. All right, So if we were going to do something on superheroes and we asked the students to read sets of cards like this, what could we do to reinvest? We've got lots of options. First of all, we could use the topic. So we could ask the students to do something on their own about comic book heroes and villains. We could ask them to use the language, so looking at narrative, past tense, right? We just looked at descriptions and comparative adjectives. We could ask them to use the text components, so how could they reuse what they've learned about icons, keywords, biographies? We could also ask them to entertain or inform, the same purpose. Consider the audience, or even switch it up. What would it look like if it were for younger kids or for parents? And of course, the kind of culture that it's embedded in. So let's see some ideas of how we can reinvest that. So taking those into consideration, one idea might be that we could ask the students very easily to create a superhero or villain card, their own new superhero or supervillain card. Now they could do that for themselves. What would they look like if they were a superhero or a villain? What would their friend look like? Perhaps an existing hero that doesn't already have a card that they've read, or an existing villain, or they could even make up a new hero or a new villain. All of those reinvestment tasks ask the students to reinvest text components, right? The different icons and language, topic, language, purpose, and audience. Another option might be that they could read through the different cards and write a dialogue or create a showdown between two of the characters, in which case they'd have to use language from the cards, they'd have to use information about the characters from the cards, and of course the culture between superheroes and supervillains, the kind of interaction that they already have. So there's lots of different ways we can reinvest, but keep in mind that we're using, as long as we ask the students to use the internal features and the external features of the text, it's a true reinvestment task. They cannot just make this up, they have to have engaged and understood key parts of the text. Finally, keep in mind that the competencies will overlap. So while a reinvestment task using topic, language, and ideas from the text we've read is really competency 2, the students will probably need to use competency 3 to reinvest. So they'll need to write or produce a text, right? Using the same topic, new language, and supported with ideas from whatever they've read. But you could also use competency 1. So for example, you could ask the students to have a debate on which superhero, and if you had a superhero versus a supervillain in a fight, who would win and why? And you'd have to prepare your ideas and arguments and have that. I'm just making that one up off the top of my head. Keep in mind though that yes, you can't have a reinvestment task, C2, without some kind of overlap with one of the other competencies. If you are short on ideas, keep in mind I've posted quite a few. The ministry has some great documents with evaluation grids that are posted online for you. There's also a really great article called 50 Alternatives to the Book Report. Here are just some of the ideas from those two. An advice column, book review, an email, a eulogy, an informal report like a memo, an infographic, a feature article, newsletter, news story, online magazine, profile, top 10 list, travel brochure, astrology sign, social workers report, college application for your superhero, a recommendation letter, a chat room conversation, yearbook entries, monologues, family history, a playlist, what kind of music does your character listen to, a word collage, social media page. The list is nearly endless. Okay, so just to recap, now we're at the end. A reinvestment task really asks students to select, organize, and adapt information, structures, and ideas from the text that they read, right? And read, we talk about read, watch, and listen. So they need to write and produce something or talk about something new. But they have to base it in ideas, information, and structures from things that they've already seen. Reinvestment tasks also necessarily involve more than one competency.